Hey, and welcome back, guys. This is session number 48 of our exploration of the Gospel of Mark. Last time, we were with Jesus at the Passover meal as he pointed out that one of his disciples was going to betray him. Well, in this session, the betrayer arrives on the scene and Jesus is arrested. But as we'll discover, the power dynamics in this passage aren't what you'd expect from someone who's about to be arrested and tried and convicted. It should be interesting, so let's go ahead and dive right into the text. So let's go ahead and dive right into the text. So let's go ahead and dive right into the text. And immediately, chapter 14, verse 43 says, "While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders." A couple of different phrases we want to look at here. The first is while he was still speaking. And I want to point out here again that marking word always occurs, right? Immediately. One of the things that Mark uses to move his way through his gospel, again, the shortest gospel of all the gospels, 16 chapters. And he uses this word consistently or constantly to move through his gospel. But it says while he was still speaking. So the first thing that should come to mind here when you read these words, while he was still speaking, is what was Jesus saying? What does while he was speaking actually refer to? And we go back and see in the preceding verses that Jesus had just got done praying in the Garden of Gethsemane and had gotten on to the disciple. And he gotten on to the disciples about falling asleep on them. And in verse 42, he says this to them: "Get up, let's go. My betrayer is on the way." And sure enough, while he was still speaking here in the text, look who shows up. Judas. Judas shows up and he has a crew with him, right? The crowd. Now, Jesus says that they came with. Now, Mark says that they came with swords and clubs from the chief priests and scribes and elders. But let's look at this word crowds. We've seen this word throughout Mark's gospel. He uses it quite often. And we've covered the word in one of our previous sessions. But up until this point, crowds has always been these welcoming, non-high. But up until this point, crowds have always been this welcoming, non-hostile type of folks, right? Well, from this point forward in the gospel, the word crowds will always be used for those who are hostile to Jesus. The crowd that once celebrated him will now revile him. So every time you see crowd moving forward in the gospel from 1443 forward, it is always someone who is not celebrating Jesus, but actually reviling him. Okay? Now, the betrayer had given them a sign saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." So he moved from Jesus saying that he was part of the 12 or one of the 12 to him being the betrayer. Judas is now called the betrayer in the text. So Judas now is not one of the 12. He's someone who is now betraying Jesus. And then what happens? He says, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And he goes on to say, "And when he came, he went up to him at once." The text goes on to say, "And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, 'Rabbi,' and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him." Now, this part of the text, he kissed Jesus, is something that you need some cultural context for, okay? Kissing in this culture is actually a sign of homage and respect for someone. So it was a customary practice for men to kiss other men as a sign of homage or respect. And the sense of the word used here was that this was a prolonged kiss. So Judas had a level of affection for Jesus. Even though he was getting ready to betray him, you could see that he had a heart level affection for Jesus as one of his disciples, as someone who had walked with him. But ultimately, there is neither homage or respect being paid in this passage, but instead betrayal, right? Because the betrayer has come to betray him, not pay homage to him or respect him, but to actually ultimately betray him. And the text says, "But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear." Got to talk about this section, right? Because somebody got straight gangster and was ready to fight for Jesus, right? One of those who stood by drew his sword. Now, this is a good time to remind you to look at other gospel accounts to fill in some details when you don't have them, especially when you're reading Mark's gospel. Remember, we said that Mark likes to move his gospel along. He's very brief. He's to the point at some points in his text. And the other gospels tend to fill in some of the details. And it's true of this text, this particular passage as well. Peter is identified as the one who actually cut off the man's ear. And the servant of the high priest is also identified as someone called Malchus in the other gospels. So we got the identity of two folks. John identifies him as Peter, as the one who cut off the man's ear. And then Malchus is identified in another gospel as the person who got their ear cut off. We also find out in the other gospels that Jesus actually picks the man's ear up and puts it back on and rebukes Peter for actually trying to fight spiritual battles with physical means. And I think this is also a reminder to you and to me that when we deal with people every single day, we don't really necessarily have to cut them with swords, right? But we do cut them with our words. We do cut them with our actions. And then we leave Jesus to pick up the pieces. We know Paul's words when he says, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but we still enter into that fray, that battle anyway, and actually fight physical battles. And actually fight physical battles rather than fighting spiritual battles. But I love this scene because it's a gentle reminder for us all that the physical battle. But I love the scene because it's a gentle reminder for us all that these physical battles that we fight aren't really worth it. And that we should commit our time to fighting spiritual battles around us rather than fighting the physical battles, right? And look at what the text goes on to say. It says, "And Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled." He says, have you come out against me as a robber? Now the Greek here refers to a thief, but not in the sense of a crime and criminal, but a revolutionary. There were plenty of revolutionaries in Jesus' time, folks who stood up against the Roman Empire, a lot of messiahs, quote unquote, who will come up and try to fight with physical force to defeat the Roman soldiers and the Roman Empire. So he says, have you come out against me as a robber? And he was saying, hey, I was there every single day with you guys and you didn't seize me. But this is happening because God has willed it to happen here in this moment. You're not in control. You had opportunities there, but God did not see fit for you to capture me while I was with you day after day. And that's because scripture is being fulfilled in that I am the Son of God, the Son of Man. Bah! In that I am the Son of God, the Son of Man. I am the one who is ultimately in control here. And the text closes with these sobering words. And they all left him and fled. They all left him and fled. I think this is a haunting ending to this passage because Mark doesn't leave anyone out. It says that they all left him and fled. So Jesus here is alone. This incident actually lives out the words found in Zechariah 13, verse 12, where it says, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. That's exactly what happened here in this text. That every person who'd been walking with him for the past 3+ years, that persons who've been following him in the crowds, that everyone in this moment left Jesus and fled. I have one takeaway for this particular passage, and it's just this, that the Christian life is less about the weapons we carry and more about the gospel that we carry. You see, we don't carry physical weapons around with us as Christians. Well, some of us do, but most of us don't carry physical weapons with us, but we do carry spiritual weapons. Bah! And more specifically, we carry the gospel. We carry the gospel of grace, the gospel of peace, the gospel of love, long suffering, and patience. We carry a gospel that forgives others who have wronged us without pulling out our own swords to fight back. We carry a gospel that allows Jesus to confront those who... We carry a gospel that allows Jesus to confront those. We carry a gospel that allows Jesus to fight our battles and confront others with his redemptive work on the cross. So our question for us, question for you and for me is, what type of weapons are we carrying around that we need to lay down and pick up the gospel and live gospel-shaped lives that impact our culture and our society in positive ways? Bah! All right, guys, that's been session number 48 of our exploration of the Gospel of Mark. Next up is session number 49. Looking forward to it. Grace and peace to you all.